to the Heritage Room tonight for the reading. This is our third year of readings, and tonight we have Fred Zydek here. Before I introduce him, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the room. Everything up here has a Nebraska connection. For those of you who haven't been here before, if you have any questions about the collection, just ask me. We're not a tax-supported service of Lincoln City Libraries. We depend on donations and grants from foundations. Right now we're in the process of trying to raise money for an endowment fund. The endowment fund will be $400,000. It's part of a challenge grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. And for every $3 we raise, we get $1 from the humanities. So we always put a plate out at these readings, and we ask anyone who's interested to join the Friends Group. That's the Nebraska Literary Heritage Association. As a member of the Friends Group, you get a calendar, which covers a 3-month period, and a newsletter every few months. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker tonight. He's from Omaha. His accomplishments are too many for me to mention. He's had 3 books of poetry published, and those are The Lights Along the Missouri, Storm Warning, and Ending the Fast. He's received several poetry awards. In 1970, the National Hart Crane Award. In 1975, the University of Texas Poetry Award. And most recently, in 1985, the Sarah O'Laughlin Foley Award for Poetry. In addition, his poems have appeared in America, Prairie Schooner, Poetry Australia, Michigan Quarterly Review, Poetry Northwest, California Quarterly, Poetry Now, and others. He's read both locally at Creighton University and University of Nebraska at Lincoln and Omaha, and he's read nationally at Seattle University, University of Washington, and University of Montana, among others. On July 19th, he'll be in Omaha reading at Dundee Book Company with Lorraine Duggan. He presently teaches at College of St. Mary, and without any more of an introduction than that, I'm going to let him come up here. Thank you.
Few people realize that I'm not really a Nebraska poet, or at least that I didn't claim to be at the outset, even though I moved here first in the 50s and then left and went back to the state of Washington where I began to go to college, and then summers I'd take vacations and come to Lincoln, Nebraska. There was a Lincoln Air Force Base in those days. And when I take vacation, people say, "Where are you going?" I say, "Well, I'm going to go to Lincoln, Nebraska. I have a lot of friends out there." And I've lived here off and on for a long time. And after UNO a couple of years ago decided to pink slip its writing department, and I bought a bookstore in Omaha, Nebraska. And then the city decided to reconstruct downtown Omaha, Nebraska. "Hi, Roy, I didn't realize you were here." And I went belly up. "Oh, Catherine, hi, how are you? How nice to see you." Pardon me. And so I packed up everything I owned and put it in the biggest truck I could get and a trailer, and decided, well, the hell with Omaha, Nebraska, and got about 500 miles out of town, and thought, ooh, wait a minute, this doesn't feel right, and decided to stop and think about it. And I weighed lots of things, you know. I'm a Northwest baby, and but I have a lot of friends here. And I began to think about the friends and my goddaughter and my experiences in my house and my neighbors. And I thought, oh my God, I can't leave. I cannot do this. So I turned the damn truck around and came back. And it's the smartest thing I've ever done in my entire life. It's absolutely, this looks like a shelf, but it's not one. So I decided what I would do is read a bunch of, I started sifting through after you invited me to read, trying to decide, well, what shall I read? And God, I realized that the fact is I'm a Nebraska poet. At least 4 out of every 5 pieces I write has something to do with my experiences here. So I thought, well, I'll do it. It's a heritage room. I'll do all Nebraska poems. And then somebody requested a poem, which broke the rhythm. And so I thought, well, hell, I can't handle this real well, so maybe I'll break the rhythm a little less difficult, and I'll add this one. And so it's sort of a Nebraska reading, is what it is. We begin in Nebraska and move around. The first piece I'm going to read is dedicated to my neighbor, who has probably been one of the strongest influence in my development as a writer since I left University of Washington. That's Linda Pratt, Dr. Linda Pratt, who teaches here at UNL. She's my neighbor. I first moved into the neighborhood, and we got on nodding acquaintances, and Eventually we started loaning lawn tools to one another, and then eventually we started talking. Well, what do you do? Well, I write poetry. Well, what do you do? Well, I criticize it. And really, there's hardly a piece. I've hardly written a single piece that Linda hasn't discussed with me in one way or the other. And she is largely responsible for the final selections this evening. I took about 80 poems over to her, and between the two of us, we whittled it down to what we have here. And then I added one poem that I didn't even submit to her, and it's called "Moving from Choogit Sound to Nebraska," and it's dedicated to Linda Pratt. Bored with what I feared of the wind's skill to take circle and form, the flat screams the prairie offers up when night darkens to a point, I return to Nebraska, where the fields still bloom wet as sponges, where whiffs of goldenrod and mustard still tickle down the Platte and Ogallala as though it were the thing to do. It is only here the sun lifts its single eye to the sower's spell, to the distant splats of green growing like warts along the rivers, to the well-planned shelters belting off the wind in songs enough to wake a sparrow asleep. Such a wind might woo away the dead. It can hold you like a portrait, or push until the house is full of nerves, windows knuckled down, a cold snow whistling to a heap. Perhaps it was a single storm that called me. These plains are Grail and Quest, born of the lightning sting, where plainsmen kneel to the sky, as surely as the hooves of great beasts still thunder in the dreams of the toothless Ogallala sleeping it off down on Jackson. Here the mighty gods of wheat and corn are piled like sticks, bartered against the mother of ice. The 7 saccharine songs of autumn sweeten the air with what always promises to drift along her rivers. It's a place to rub the sun until the white light of glaucoma lingers on the lids, a place where a stone is just a stone until you throw it, the wind only wind until it swoops down between the heat of the prairie and the clear chill slipping down the Dakota moon. It is just then when the air slams shut and the clouds hold their breath until they're thin and green that I squint out along the land and see Puget sailboats bobbing, tilting their great cheeks leeward. It's then I see great whales lifting like mighty anthems from the sea, wearing the skins of the land's last amen. The second piece is one I struggled with for years, and I still don't know if I think it's done. It's a little poem called Omaha. It's dedicated to S.J. Holmes. She's the last stop before the wind bluffs its way out east, the only place on the planet where even the stones acknowledge what the thunder knows each time it slams its way downtown. Here the very seasons understand what it is we expect of them. Things become themselves in Omaha. A twist of sculpture here, the mentality of sorghum there, rain clearing the dust between them. In autumn she's a painted lady, wears too much rouge and shadow, leaves her outer garments all over town, until she stands naked as a leafless tree, branches gone gray, shivering like a homeless child in the thin Dakota wind. Winter comes to town wearing blizzards in her hair. I follow the cobbles down Harney Street, hide out in Matthew's bookstore, wait for the first slice of birds to wing their way towards Elmwood Park. Obviously, Omaha has had some significant effect upon some of this stuff. We have outside of Omaha a little town called Bellevue, and in Bellevue we have a restaurant called the Bellevue River Queen. Now, the Bellevue River Queen is not an old showboat or an old riverboat that's been converted over into a restaurant. It's a big restaurant that was built to sort of look like a riverboat, and they serve the biggest lobster tail in the United States, I suspect. One night I had a dream, kind of a vision, after having dinner there and watching friends of mine, the Diane sisters, who were performing in the bar. And in my vision, the restaurant became a river boat, trying desperately to get from land back to sea. So this is the Bellevue River Queen. She's quiet now. The last hungry man left prawn-bellied and full of Nebraska gin. She sits alone in spasms of history, knows what names move along the river's edge. She knows the wisdom of weeds, the dark milk of dawn gathering like pumice on the water, on the sand. She dreams of oceans. The smell of creosote bursts in her brain. She lunges towards the river. She's pulled up her planks. Her stern begins to thump and rock. She's belching black thunder, piping steam to all her veins, urging her waking wheel past the hickory and elm, her many eyes fixed on a clear vision of the sea. I sent that to the owners of the restaurant, thinking that there might at least be a free martini or something in it. There was not. We also have in Omaha the nation's sixth largest cathedral. At least it was sixth largest when it was made a national shrine. I don't know if it's been beat since then. St. Cecilia's. And for a number of years, a very close friend of mine was pastor there. And the place has a real special place in my whole life and maturation as a person. This is called Sanctuary, St. Cecilia's, for Father Paul. God's back is arched along both walls. St. Cecilia herself, etched like a prayer above the old high altar, is Roman to the core. I sit 3 pillars deep on the sheepside, fondling beads. Watch God bloom in the stained glass reflections just beneath the pro nobis on the high polished marble. The choir ascends the loft 1 note at a time. St. Gregory blooms to the ancient promise. Small boys carry fire, light candles at God's feet. We are standing now, reciting our sins as though they were the surest things about us. St. Cecilia has opened the eyes of heaven. The Lord's Prayer is pounding in her ears. When I got out of the service in 1960, my first urge was to stay here. And I went up to Omaha looking for work, and there was an employment agency in the old Woodman Tower. I ended up not taking work and going back to Washington State and going to school. But the old Woodman Tower was always kind of a special landmark to anybody who visited Omaha from Lincoln anyway. And when they tore it down, I went down to watch. And when they tore it down, there was a friend of mine who was then president of Woodman of the World by the name of Ted Newton. And it was real hard for Ted to watch. It was real hard for everybody to watch it. Real landmark kind of building. So this poem is simply called Downing the Old Woodman Tower for Ted Newton. We wait together, time and I, lost in what cannot stand the test of time. Lost in what clings to the pavement once the rain, worn to a vapor, leaves its parched and dusty breath in the knowledge that sifts between us. My stomach is the stomach of a fish. I'm caught in a strange sea, a school where not all in attendance realize this journey has been all upstream. None of us will go back the way we came. What began swimming here ends here. We gather to watch a hanging, the sudden loss of sure footing when the bottom drops away from the world and we are caught by the necks, things hung out like linen on the last day of the world. The air fills with 1,000 cannons. The windows of the old tower blink and are gone, clatter through the years like so much broken china. I walk away inside myself, head down, hands stuffed in my pockets. About 3 or 4 hours drive out of Omaha, headed up through Norfolk. There's a little town called Royal, Nebraska. And on a good day, the population is about 90. I don't know why they don't just have those little hooks, where you can go out daily and change the things. But about every month or so it changes. A couple people die, a couple people are born, a couple people move away. And near Royal, Nebraska, is a lake called Grove Lake. That is incredible. It's just a beautiful place to visit. There's a stream that surrounds one end of it that's crystal clear. There's all kinds of wild plums growing all the way down the road getting to the lake. If you go at the right time of the season, you can just stuff yourself. It's just a generally gorgeous part of the state. And I have very good friends living there, Ronnie and Carol and Tina and Tim. And this poem is dedicated to them. called Camping Near Grove Lake. Dare anyone doubt the trees when the sun's last licks slip away in silence? We go among them unafraid. Out near the thistle blooms and cattails, bullfrogs full of wet and wonder tell us their low-throated wisdom. We climb Royal Hill, watch the small towns blink out for the night. Our minds go vacant as windows. We watch the one-eyed moon wade belly deep across the pond. 2 nightfowl tow silver wakes near shore. The lake slows to a slice of unpulsed time. We prowl the darkness, our hearts all thumbs. In 1975, I was working out in Bellevue, Nebraska. Now, mind you, I'd lived here off and on since 1956, and I had never seen a tornado. I had never seen a tornado. If a tornado occurred, it occurred while I was on vacation, and all I had were reports from friends. And one day, about, I guess, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, sirens started to ring in Bellevue, and we had to run everybody into a little hallway, and finally an all-clear thing rang, and they decided to send everybody home because there were broken trees all over God's green earth. This was May 5th, 1975. And we got about halfway downtown on our way home from Bellevue, and something struck again, and we had to go hide in the police station for an hour or so. It was an incredible experience, and then not knowing that I was breaking every law in the world, I drove right through the worst area, trying to find out if a friend's house was okay. And so I struggled with the poem for quite a while. It's called War Wind, Wild Wind. It had been a firm May day. The morning rode in on slips of bird song light until it grew green and silent on the north lawn. At times it pranced about on golden hooves, winking among the cottonwoods and willows. By noon the clouds began to dull and wince, twist into strands of dark awe and tangle. At 3 p.m., the sky filled with pellets. 2 beasts, horns made of fire, thundered, butted their way among thin slices of wind until the very air broke in pieces. Suddenly, taking the longest look down, sky dissolved to something lean and twisted. Time shrunk to a funnel, a wail of winds. I could not keep the bull of woe at bay. It bellowed loud enough to crush the breath. Some said it stood for the slightest moment in a scream of living light. Still others spoke of the city crushing steel on steel, sudden sounds of locomotives roaring towards home, fate the only passenger. About sometime right after the bankruptcy, after I moved back, I have a very close friend by the name of Father Tom Grayson, who helped pack that truck from 7 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night, and who nonetheless was glad to come over and help me unpack it 3 days later. First thing I learned after I got enough stuff unpacked to kind of live in the house again, was that it's real hard to find a job in October when you're 48, and it was, oh God, it was just, I was really getting exasperated. And Tom suggested that we drive out to Humphrey, Nebraska, and just take a day away from the city and a day away from job hunting, and just go out and relax and have a nice breakfast someplace early in the morning. And there was an old Franciscan monastery out there we could go visit and have lunch at, and a couple of abandoned churches, and it would do me good, and it did me good. And out in Platte County, there's an abandoned church that's been abandoned just about since Vatican II started digging its claws into reality. And the place is an incredible spectacle. And we stopped and got permission from the farmer who bought the land and the church, and got permission to go and look on the inside. Gee, it's good to see you. It really is. This is just called Abandoned Church, Platte County, Nebraska. There's a grove of young cottonwood growing through the sidewalk leading to the front steps. They've broken the concrete like an iceberg breaks through the hull of a ship. In this place, the great anchor did not hold. Captain, ship, and crew evaporated as surely as the great sea that once swirled here. We climb the steps to the big withered doors, avoid the cow patties and pigeon dew as best we can, and continue upwards like curious trolls or large white rats out to seek their fortunes in what is left when the fire is taken from the hearth and the cave is left to fend for itself. We enter like wounded sheep. The place reeks. There's bat dung everywhere, rows of the hellish things in the choir loft and belfry. We go below them unnoticed. Stained glass, broken and strange, is everywhere. We find a woman's cracked eye near the high altar, pieces of her halo in the men's room, a thumb in the sacristy, chips of her tears ground up and dry as the dust itself. The floor sags. We know it wants to claim us. Hearing odd squeaks, things that scurry downstairs, we forgive our urge to seek the basement, go as fast as we can to the front door. Something here is dying. It knows our names. I have a friend who really is into things like fossil digging, and on weekends. And I'm the sort of person that on weekends likes to get up early and write poems and not shave and not get out of my bathrobe and never take off my slippers and not answer the telephone and not go outdoors, and I'm not the kind of person that likes to go fossil digging and get up early in the morning and drive out in the country. But I agreed to go fossil digging. And it was a real interesting experience. The farmer said yes, we could tromp through, and yes, in fact, he had heard that there were fossils back in the walls of the cliffs behind his farm, and sure, we could go through. It was okay. He didn't bother to tell us that there was a bull down in one of the fields that we had to cross that had other inclinations about who would and would not cross the field. So it turned out to be a real interesting experience. The whole day did. But I did learn something about fossil digging, and so here's a poem called Fossil Digging for Gerald Storm. We go the way of the wind-charred Platte, places where cottonwood and firefly dance before oblivion's crumbled secret. We follow the arms of the river, collect bits of history and bone, the powdery edges of prayer tempting us with shark's tooth and crinoid. We walk among sea lily and vertebrae, find enormous eggs, a petrified clam, brittle imprints of fern and daisy, pieces where the wind recalls our oldest dreams. The ages swim in your smile. You are knee-deep in God's varicose veins, waiting in the echo of an eye for things with no memory of their own. Now there's going to be a little bit of a break, I think, from Nebraska poems. There's a poet in Australia by the name of Andrew Taylor who publishes real widely in a lot of American journals. He's got a couple collections out. He published a poem in America called Catching Fish that just made me mad as hell to think that anybody could get that much joy from the things he described that he was doing to the fish. So I wrote a poem called Killing Fish and sent it to him. And he responded by writing a poem called Eating Fish, which is every bit as gruesome as the poem about catching fish. So I responded and wrote a poem about cleaning fish to him. And he wrote another poem back that was a real surrealistic thing about existence and survival in fish. And so I wrote a little poem called Hooked on Fish. And when he got the little poem called Hooked on Fish, he wrote me a letter. And now we have a little mild correspondence going on, and we don't write poems anymore. This is called Hooked on Fish for Andrew Taylor. Deep inside the pond, fins filled with woe, the fish pray the catch will go slow. One becomes a fish, slips long and liquid to the sea, drifts in glimpses of twist and fin. Now they are dancing, gills all willowy, shivering in the river's promise. Above them, the moon, like the eye of a single fish, swims into place. When I first started going to school and going to creative writing workshops and all that kind of stuff. I was real fortunate in the fact that a couple of people liked me right off the bat, were real kind to me. And one of those people was a fellow by the name of David Wagner, who, unless you follow the journals real closely, you've probably never heard of, but he's a magnificent poet, a good novelist, playwright. And David sort of took me under his wing and became even the chairperson for on my thesis committee. And he did all kinds of little special things, like when Richard Eberhardt was coming to town to teach for 2 semesters, it was, Fred, do you mind going to the airport to pick up Mr. Eberhardt? And, no, I don't mind at all. Or Richard Hugo is going to be coming in on a bus. Do you mind going down to the Greyhound and picking him up? And no, So I got to meet lots of people. And the first time I met Richard Hugo was I was already into the master's program, and he was coming to do a lecture over at Seattle University, and I was at the University of Washington by then, although Seattle University is where I did my undergraduate work. And a friend of mine was over there teaching by the name of Madeline DeFries. She was then still Sister Mary Gilbert, and she knew Richard Hugo real well, kept him sober all the time. So she arranged for me to meet him in the parking lot and get him up to her apartment so she could keep him sober till the reading he was coming to Seattle for. And I was really excited about meeting him because she had sent some poems to him, and he'd been very kind about the poems, said nice things about them. So I was out in the parking lot. Anyway, this is called Meeting the Missoula Poet, and the poem comes from about 1966 or so. He had come from the wilds of Montana to lecture the sea poets and read them poems in concert with Stafford and DeFries. I was to meet him in the parking lot and be his escort to an audience with Sister Mary Gilbert, a poet nun who would feed him lunch and keep him sober, until the Retke Auditorium bulged with those who came to laud and praise him. Would he smell of hickory, pine, and fir, the kind of sweat poets make when caught tending some poem's airy madness? Would I swoon like some giddy schoolgirl? Would his glance make me a poet? I prayed for it all. Before I could brace my soul to meet him, he was out of the car, shaking my hand. He had read the poems the nun sent, my poems, recited one, he said, he wished was his. Before I could form the words to thank him, he grabbed and hugged me in the rain and said, well, kid, don't you wish this stuff was beer? That's what he did, because he knew he was going to spend the day sober with Madeline DeFries, and he wished the rain was beer. Well, several years later, he came back, and they were reading again, and this time, the three of us, he had just published a little collection of poems called Death of the Kapowsin Tavern. And so we decided to be romantic as hell, and the three of us drive up to Lake Kapowsin, where the Kapowsin Tavern used to be, a little bitty town, Florin Royal. And then we would take a picnic lunch and go to Lake Kapowsin and just have lunch. But the crazy thing about this was that I was just in the process of, ready to jump off the Aurora Street Bridge in Seattle because my life was in shambles. And Madeline had just decided, Sister Mary Gilbert had just decided to become Madeline DeFries and quit being a nun. And Richard was just in the process of divorcing his wife. So while this would have been a real joyous, happy occasion, we barely said a word to each other all the way up there and all the way through the picnic. And then we decided we would each write poems about it. We ended up sitting in a place with some willow trees and some black mint. It's a real dark, kind of dark green mint grows along the lake. It's just called Black Mint Dreams for Richard Hugo and Madeline DeFries. We stand, children born of black waters, three wax figures waiting like unkissed girls to hide a promise or repeat a crime. Breathe our perfumed and terrible dreams on the white thunder of paper. We wash our dark poems in the dark pool like echoes. Shadow must seek shadow. They lead the way. Night waits in embers of the tavern. We press into each other's silent, fragile bones nesting near the water, placing marks where no such marks have been. We swell like blossoms to touch it all, to hold our bare illusions for each passer-by, for each wild mint flower dying beneath us. We sit below the marshes, below the graves of Carbonado, collecting darkness like a past. An old man recites our names as though stepping on the corpse of the dead god. We pitch our clumsy camp like trespassers who touch embers of the sleeping. The dead love their names. We go among them unnoticed. And this last one was written the day after a friend of mine, a poet in Seattle by the name of Tom Snyder, called me on the phone to tell me that Richard Hugo was in the hospital in Seattle and that he was having a lung removed because of cancer, and that he'd been very, very ill. This is a letter poem, so you have to forgive it in some ways. It doesn't have to follow a lot of the same rules other poems have to follow. And it was, in fact, if any of you follow Richard Hugo, you know, he's sort of the guy that started the letter poem and used to insist that I try some. I could loosen up if I do some letter poems, you know. So I've written a lot of them, and it's amazing. These things are amazing. People publish them on a regular basis, which always amazes me. So you get to do two things. You write to somebody you owe a letter to, and you know, then America sends you $25 on top of it. So anyway, this is called Letter to Hugo, 1 March 1981. Dear Dick, news always reaches Nebraska last. Tom Snyder from Indianola called to say the whole West Coast was in prayer. He said that he's seen your name drifting out to sea. He lit candles along Bainbridge shore trying to call you back to whole soul. He said his dream went white at the center. That night I prayed 3 times for your healing. Something slammed shut on all of us. The world spun its dizzy magic to the gut. I calmed down by smoking myself to a daze. When the mail finally came, a rejection slip said they were sorry about the poems, and did I know Hugo just lost a lung. I've been limp all day. Remember the year we drove to Kapowson with DeFreeze, and none of us could recite a dark sonnet by Shakespeare, but each of us could quote Bill Stafford's Traveling Through the Dark by heart? Talent is never enough. I plan a trip out in August. Please live. Love, Fred. This next piece is the one that was requested. I'm particularly fond of the piece because there's a whole bunch of folks out there that call me a Catholic poet. It's damn near true, but it's much more true that I'm something else. But I like this poem. God and I have been chasing each other around for a lot of years, kind of like wind sails on a windmill. And we finally came to a couple of agreements. I don't do any miracles, and he doesn't mow any lawns, I think is how the saying goes. Anyway, finally, one day deciding I didn't give a damn whether I could figure any of the crap out intellectually anymore, and it just didn't matter. Didn't have anything to do with what it was I was looking for there. So I wrote this poem. And I'm really pleased about the poem, too, because I sent it off to John Moffat, who edits America, who's been real kind to my work over the years. And John wanted to publish it, but the editors, all Jesuits, decided that it was just a little too liberal for them. So I sent it to Sisters Today, and they published it and gobbled it up, which it says something very important about those of you who don't know much about the Roman Catholic Church. It's called Song for the Dreamer. I forgot to check and see how I'm doing. Have I gone over? Because I'm not anywhere near done. All right. A Song for the Dreamer. If you were a simple force, the clean equation that hums throughout the galaxies, I would still remove my shoes and kneel to you. If you were but the stuff of light, the quick bright that blinds, or just the rain, still I would cling to the simplest stones, knowing you had made them. If you were but the appendage of verbs, the small explosions that lift the bread, if you were a joker jumping from planet to planet, giggling to see your footprints sparkle through the Milky Way, if you were but a prank, I would still tip my hat at the wonders you scare into place. If you were nothing more than the ornamentation of our awe, a stone-carved smile on the jungle floor, still I would offer you my urges, curtsy in your direction, each time spring's pubic green nudged out from the winter wind, leaving my mouth baffled and open. It's a Unitarian poem, isn't it? This next one is the one I thought would kind of maybe break this break between Nebraska poems and non-Nebraska poems. I have long debates with my friend Father Tom about eschatology. Everybody who doesn't know what eschatology means, please nod. Oh, good. All right. Well, end times, when everything's going to slam shut. You know, Catholics, unfortunately, have to share certain beliefs with fundamentalists, and one of those is that stuff's going to slam shut someday. Well, we have a lot of debates about this because there are lots of folks, you know, there was a big move among the Baptists and the Jehovah's Witnesses in 1975 that was going to be it. You know, people were selling their businesses and getting up on high ground. And we talk a lot about end times and whether it's even important, you know, and what does eschatology really mean and who really is the eschaton? What is really the eschaton? So one day when he felt that I had won the argument, was really angry at me for doing so. He said, I'm not going to take anything you say about eschatology seriously until you've written a poem about it. So this poem is called The Eschaton. All day I have laid out my sins like unmatched socks. I'm going broke in Babylon. My soul has a headache or a toe-ache or something in between. At times like this, repentance is little more than a torn and dirty shirt, regret a decoration on my tie, repetition the only shoe that still fits. Tell the watchdogs of morality my mental condition's illegal. It's the kind of place they vent their deepest fears. I'm the stuff they hide in their prayer books and hymnals. Tell them things burn inside the candle's flame we did not put there. Wick and ember host unusual stuff. You know stuff. It explains away the universe, transubstantiates itself in litters, gathers itself in storms until what the darkest night requires gets caught in small beads along the branches of the family tree. Tell them DNA, Theodore Retke, New York City, green apples, and the Roman Catholic Church all have logical explanations, and that I'm what gets caught in the middle. Tell them there's an alkali mystery sniffing about in the dark, that a thing born of totem urges has dreams that walk the skin unchecked. Tell them I'm the last thing that scatters into music. So now I'm going to try to turn a little bit towards Lincoln. And so this next piece is called Taking Highway 80 to Lincoln. I don't know how many of the rest of you notice when you go from Lincoln to Omaha, or those of you who come from Omaha to Lincoln, but somewhere before you get to the Platte River, there are two laughing barns, two happy barns. Sometimes, if the bottom door is open and the two top windows are open, or even if just one's open and one's closed, always looks like it's laughing at you, you know, and I think, boy, are you right. Why am I driving down here again? I love to walk, but I look forward to seeing the barns, and I feel like we've developed a real relationship over the years. And so I don't know why I'm saying this, I think it appears in the poem. God, let's hope so. Taking Highway 80 to Lincoln. The wind is gone behind the house, one desolate scarecrow, body bowing to the dust, silhouettes against the sun's somber fire. We're near the river, near the laughing barns along the Platte, among the cornfields and sorghum rows, halfway between the gleaner's gown and staff, where everything drinks down the river. The land is everywhere familiar, sudden and secret as the hearts of flowers dropping lazily to the garden floor. The land is flat as the sky is wide against the Oto moon, wandering out across the plains, wearing nothing more than reason in her hair. This next piece is called Platte River Song, and on Highway 80 you have to cross the Platte River. It's dedicated to Thelma Drayton, whom I'm sure none of you have ever heard of. But because it's dedicated to Thelma Drayton, I want to bring her to life a few minutes before I read the poem. Thelma, years and years and years and years ago, was a writer for the Omaha World Herald, real controversial kind of writer, and editor of a department for a while. A lot of people thought she was a man. Family owned the Drayton wheat ranches and cattle ranches out in western Omaha and western Nebraska. Pretty wealthy family. I'd heard lots about her, She was a close friend of Mari Sandos, and Tennessee Williams would visit her home out in Alvo, Nebraska. She just knew everybody on God's green earth. It seemed like there was anybody. And I was real anxious to meet her. This is in the early 50s. And I was nervous about meeting her because I'd heard all kinds of stories about how she'd yelled and bellowed at people and punched people and walked out of rooms, and just a real rough, tough lady. So when we got there, and I was like 18, 19 years old, you know. So we got to her home, and I had rehearsed all the way to her home what I would say. And I'd finally settled on, "How do you do, Miss Drayton? It's very nice to meet you." And that's what I said. "How do you do, Miss Drayton? It's very nice to meet you." And she said, "How the hell do you know if it's nice to meet me or not?" And at dinner, she asked me how my steak was. And I said, "Well, to be real honest with you, it's a little tough." And she said, "Well, if you don't like the damn thing, throw it on the floor." So I thought about it for a few minutes, and I picked up my plate, and I just threw it on the floor. And she got up, and she walked over to me, and she said, "Joe's right. I'm going to like you." But finally, as I got to know Thelma, she was a soft, really a soft, gentle person who was very, very aware of the beautiful small things around her farm and around her state. And if there was anything she loved, it was her Sunday picnics along the Platte. So this is called Platte River Song for Thelma Drayton. This river's dreams go slow before the wind, nest like leafy secrets along the shore, slip slight and silvery to the marshes, and yawn their way downstream. She is thin-skinned, swaddled in green pastures. Sea things of silk and raw wonder cluster along her like minnows darting among her restless dreams. We wade out among her sand and shallows, go no more than knee-deep from shore to shore. It is a skinny victory. It is a skinny victory, as summer is but half the matter. In winter she's dizzy and full-bellied, chunks of ice, flat as the prairie and round as the moon, rumble down her spine like the thunder does when it rumbles through the Dakota snows and becomes a fit for getting even. In spring she's a thing gone utterly mad, something that sneaks to the barely pubic cornfields where small fish swim among the wheat, the jasper hearts of sorghum and pigweed, a single swan drifting above their secret. There's a statue in Lancaster County up in Pioneer Park that has always intrigued me. It was a real disappointment to come back in 1972 and discover that somebody whacked a big chunk off of it, or thrown rocks at it, or shot off a big chunk of it, or something. His nose is gone. His nose. I have pictures of him with a nose in the old days. And this is just a little skinny poem called Indian Statue, Pioneer Park, Lancaster County, Nebraska. I'm going way over, aren't I? No? The sign welded to the cyclone fence which surrounds his finite reservation calls him Scout, one of many who helped whites find their way out of Nebraska and into the land of the Crow. Except for this hulk of stone, holding a stone spear in one hand and shading his brow with the other, I've never seen an Indian walk here. I worry about these things. But I think I need that cup of coffee that's in your office because I've run out of water. When I went on the trip with Father Tom and saw the abandoned church and went to the Franciscan monastery, we went out to his father and his father's two brothers have they put all their farms together, and they were reaping corn. Now, I'm a Washington State boy, hill country, you know, and although I've heard, thank you so much. While I've heard lots about how you reap corn, I've never done it. So the first thing I got to do when we got out there was, they said when they came in from the rows, "How would you like to take a ride in the combine?" Ooh, yeah. So I climbed up in the combine and I took a ride in the combine. Really surprised me. It's air conditioned. There was Beethoven's Fifth Symphony blatting from stereo speakers in there with this old farmer. There was a little ice chest with Schlitz beer in it, and we were very, very comfortable. And it was not like I thought it was going to be at all. Then I started paying attention to what's actually going on. We got down to the end, and he turned the thing around and he said, well, how would you like to drive it back and fill the truck? Ooh, yeah. So I got to do that. And it's a lot easier than you think. There's a whole bunch of those things, but if you just keep the one in front of you, in the center of the row in front of you, everything else does what it's supposed to do. And you go slow enough, you can always turn off the key if you get scared. This is called Combine. Morning scratches at the icy windows, chisels pristine and crystal reminders that the harvest hasn't ended unless the workmen have gathered in all the sheaves. We, armed with thermoses of black coffee, tapes of Beethoven, Bach, and Andrew Crouch, mount the great harvester beast 2 by 2. We look more like pilots in a cockpit than dirt farmers about to scathe the land. We perch in the cab like captains guiding an enormous ship safely out to sea. Great crows, seagulls of the fields lead the way. The air is laced with smells of ripe sorghum, the brittle sounds of corn stalks in the wind. We bring the fields to their knees, move through the long rows like some giant sloth inching its way belly deep through the ornaments of corn and barley, wheat and sunflower, all the weighty symbols of bread and wine waiting to be harvested for the king. We do not go among these unnoticed. We leave nothing in our wake but stubble. Even the crows will not have it. The fields look gaunt and hungry, lean as death itself. What was once brewed with honey has gone white, dusty as the dry ferns along the Platte. But in the silos outside Humphrey are seeds enough to reach the very moon. I don't know whether to read fast to get through the next couple or just to go ahead and make you sit there. Is anybody doing this yet? You don't know what that is? Well, usually when you read past 50 minutes or 45 minutes, they start doing this. And it means like you've made your point. This little piece is called Pond. In such a place, my father taught me how to fish, though to this day I have never touched a worm. I'd look deep into the can, poke it with a stick, and watch in horror how like fingers worms could be. I'd try to think of fish's toes sleeping beneath the waves, or the gnarled grunts of bullfrogs pouting up more air in their chins. Something in me always grew limp, and the mind would divide in the senses until each was silent as a potato. Nothing helped. Those who have no eyes molested every dream the soul tried to close up, and the tallest things about me would get up on all fours, hear the willow weeds whistle what the wind knows when the bones try to speak for themselves. I'll do 3. This is simply called The Thawing. The sky shrinks in the laughter of small birds, shivers in the shadows where patches of snow are strung like beads. I watch the day turn blue. Behind the house, head falling to zero, the slow sun lifts its hair to the garden's many eyes. The crocus have cozied up, as though the world might never tremble. The birds grow brown and gradual. And here, high at the attic, there is evidence that the field mice have already made the long climb down the ivy. Now, the next 2 poems were really a bear to write because I decided it's really time to try to do something, full circle with mutability. And then, everybody's done that, Roy, as you know. I mean, how the hell do you say anything significant about something that starts in the spring and ends in the winter again? And I decided several times while writing this thing in both of these pieces that they just weren't worth it. And actually, the first piece sort of comes out of the other piece because the section on autumn wouldn't quit. So I finally decided it must be another poem. And in the end, I took the thing over. It's called Nebraska Quartet. What else would you name a thing like that? And I took it over to Linda Pratt and let her worry about it. And she said she thought it was very successful. So I skipped across the street and So I think I've probably done an okay poem on mutability. But first I'll read Going Among the Leaves, which is an expanded autumn section of that poem. I had gone to the garden to quiet the trees when all at once the sky went wild with rust. The leaves began to thin at the edges, paled, winced, exploded in candum yellows, and started evaporating their way to the stars. I was surrounded by leaves gone thin and brittle as fine bone china. You would have pitied me. Caught as I was in a fit of leaves, spun dizzy and ashamed, I looked more like a rip in the canvas than anything painted there. I was knee-deep in all their fears and trepidations. The leaves did not notice. I was alone, a thing unaffected by their season, except to notice how slender the thread between the moment of green and the last weak grasps for the stem. Most fell right away. A few, those who still wore the palest greens, relics of the magic that once sustained them, clung to their little branches like old men clinging to their last limp, erotic dreams. Nothing helped. Eventually they all fell, piled themselves at the feet of the forest, and began to let the rain and damp mosses have their way with them. Each would now decay back into the very brine that bore them. And I, poor child of Eve, cut from the stem years before them, wondered what was paling in me. This next piece is called Nebraska Quartet. And I found it really difficult to write, and I'm not really even sure after Linda's good, kind words if I don't worry a lot about it. To date, nobody's gobbled it up. You know, if somebody gobbles it up, well, that always changes everything, doesn't it, Bill? If they gobble it up, boy, is that a poem. If they send a check. In fact, you know, Theodore Retzky said that one time. There's a movie of him lecturing a bunch of students at the University of Washington, and they asked him, one of the students said, how do you know when you wrote a truly fine poem? When do you know that a poem is really one of the best poems you've written? And he said, by the size of the check that comes in the mail. Nebraska Quartet, Spring. This is for Jim Kelly, who's a friend of mine on the City Planning Committee in Omaha. Once more the green creeps out on the branches. Everything with urges goes to the stems. Nebraska grows wild and feathery, a thing young in the eyes, crazed by fire, dizzy with shoots of peony and grasses, the magic of green magic everywhere delicious, and in the leaf, music. Summer. 3 o'clock hangs limp on the lawn. The leaves, wide-eyed, full of wonder, stare at the sun until at last they stare the damn thing down. A few have already given the wind its way with them and swarm like butterflies, single-winged and full of worries. I go among them more exhausted than ashamed. Autumn. Autumn confesses both stamen and stem with what ails her. She wears too much makeup, begins tinting her hair, pulls the old shawl closer at her shoulders, wears small aprons embroidered in yellow and gold, sleeps in on Saturdays, and sometimes arrives late for services, often wears old ribbons in her hair. Winter. Nebraska becomes one chunk of white glass, chills the life from everything, reflects it back along the Platte and Ogallala. A white-laced spinster in gossamer gown walks slowly every inch of the state, carries a single message among them, recites their names, one leaf at a time. Thank you very much.